If someone had told me a confession beside a stack of oranges would rewrite everything, I would have sworn I was immune. Imagine spending years beside someone you secretly love, hiding it behind polished smiles and late-night overtime. That was Nora Quinn's daily life at Luminate Corp, stealing glances at the untouchable CEO, Vesper Langford, from a careful distance. But what happens when the weight of unspoken love becomes too much, and a chance run-in at a grocery store tilts everything off its axis? Before we dive into this emotional ride, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The elevator doors closed for the last time. Nora's resignation letter sat on Vesper's desk like a bomb waiting to explode. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across the polished marble of Luminate Corp's executive suite. Nora Quinn stood outside Vesper Langford's corner office, her resignation letter trembling slightly in her perfectly manicured hands. 3 years. 3 years of arriving before dawn, staying past midnight, anticipating Vesper's every need before she even voiced it. 3 years of stolen glances across conference rooms, of brushing fingers when passing documents, of pretending her heart didn't skip a beat every time Vesper said her name in that low, commanding voice. Nora knocked twice on the mahogany door, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway like gunshots. "Come in." Vesper didn't look up from her laptop screen. She never did during their morning briefings. Her dark hair was pulled back in that signature low bun, not a strand out of place, despite the fact that she'd probably been here since 5 a.m. The navy Armani blazer hugged her shoulders perfectly, projecting the same untouchable authority that had built Luminate Corporation from a startup in her Harvard dorm room into a tech empire worth $3 billion. Nora had memorized every detail of Vesper's morning routine over the past 3 years. The way she held her coffee cup with both hands when she was thinking. The way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on particularly complex problems. The way her green eyes would flash with excitement when she had a breakthrough idea. "Your schedule for today," Nora said, placing the tablet on Vesper's desk with practiced precision. Her voice sounded normal, professional, giving no hint of the storm raging inside her chest. "The board meeting at 10 o'clock, lunch with the Singapore investors at 1:30, and the quarterly review at 4. I've also moved your call with the London office to tomorrow morning to give you more prep time for the Morrison presentation." Vesper's fingers paused over the keyboard. Something in Nora's voice was different, quieter, final. After 3 years of working together, Vesper had learned to read Nora's moods like weather patterns. This felt like the calm before a hurricane. And Vesper finally looked up, those piercing green eyes meeting Nora's for just a moment before Nora looked away. Even that brief contact sent electricity shooting through Nora's nervous system. Nora's throat felt like sandpaper. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in her apartment mirror, standing in front of her bathroom reflection at 3 a.m., practicing the words until they felt like stones in her mouth. And this, she placed the white envelope next to the tablet, her hand shaking slightly. The envelope looked so innocent, so small, considering it contained the end of everything that mattered to her. Vesper stared at it like it might bite her. Her face went completely blank. That mask she wore during hostile takeovers, during board coups, during every moment when showing emotion meant showing weakness in a world that was already stacked against women in tech. "What is it?" "My resignation." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had already consumed everything. Vesper's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. For a moment, the only sound in the office was the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below and the soft whir of the air conditioning. "Resignation." Vesper repeated the word slowly, as if testing how it tasted, as if she could make it mean something different by saying it carefully enough. "Effective when?" "Immediately." Nora had planned to be professional, courteous, brief. She'd planned to shake Vesper's hand, thank her for the opportunity, and walk out with her dignity intact. She hadn't planned for the way Vesper's jaw would tighten almost imperceptibly, or how those green eyes would search her face like they were looking for something they'd lost. "I see." Vesper set down her coffee cup with deliberate care and picked up the envelope, but didn't open it. Her fingers traced the edge of the paper. "May I ask why?" Nora's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure Vesper could hear it. "Because I love you. Because I dream about you every night. And wake up disappointed that it was just a dream. Because every morning when you smile at me over coffee, I forget how to breathe. Because watching you date other people is slowly killing me. Because staying here is torture and leaving might kill me quickly, but at least it'll be over. Personal reasons, she said instead. Vesper's laugh was sharp, humorless, like the sound of glass breaking. Personal reasons. After 3 years of 16-hour days, after building this department from nothing, after becoming indispensable to this company, personal reasons. Yes, that's all you're going to give me. Nora forced herself to meet Vesper's gaze. Those eyes that had haunted her dreams. That had looked at her with approval during successful presentations, frustration during crisis management, amusement during their rare moments of levity, but never, never, with the warmth she desperately wanted to see. That's all I can give you. Vesper stood slowly, her 5 feet 8 inches frame commanding even in the vast office with its panoramic view of Manhattan Harbor. She walked to the window, her back to Nora, hands clasped behind her like a general surveying a battlefield she was about to lose. Nora watched the elegant line of Vesper's spine. The way her blazer pulled slightly across her shoulders. The way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. She memorized it all, knowing this might be the last time she'd see Vesper like this. Unguarded, vulnerable, human. I could make you stay, Vesper said quietly, her voice barely audible. Your contract has a 6-month notice period. You could try. Vesper turned around, and for just a second, Nora saw something crack in that perfect composure. Confusion, maybe even hurt. It was gone so quickly, Nora might have imagined it, but the glimpse of vulnerability made her chest ache. Nora. Vesper's voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. She took a step closer and Nora caught a whiff of her perfume. That subtle blend of jasmine and cedar that had become Nora's favorite scent in the world. If this is about the Morrison account, about the hours, about the pressure. It's not about work. Then what? Nora closed her eyes, trying to find strength she wasn't sure she possessed. When she opened them, Vesper was closer. Close enough that Nora could see the tiny flecks of gold in her green eyes. Close enough to count the faint freckles across her nose that makeup couldn't quite hide. I can't tell you that. Can't or won't. Both. Vesper studied her face for a long moment, and Nora felt exposed, like Vesper could see right through her carefully constructed walls to the mess of longing and heartbreak underneath. Vesper had always been able to read people. It was part of what made her such a brilliant CEO. But Nora had spent 3 years perfecting the art of hiding her feelings. Of being professional and competent and utterly invisible as anything other than the perfect assistant. Fine. Vesper's voice went cold again. Professional. The walls slammed back up and the CEO mask slid into place. HR will process your departure. You can clear out your desk today. Nora nodded. She'd expected this. The Ice Queen returning. The emotional distance that Vesper used to protect herself from anything that might threaten her control. It still felt like a slap. Thank you for the opportunity, Ms. Langford. Ms. Langford, not Vesper. Like she'd been calling her for months now during their late-night strategy sessions when the office was empty and the barriers between them seemed thinner. The formality felt like a funeral. Nora. Vesper's voice stopped her at the door and Nora's hand trembled on the handle. Whatever this is about, I hope you find what you're looking for. Nora's throat closed up. She wanted to turn around, wanted to run back to Vesper and tell her everything. Wanted to throw caution to the wind and kiss her the way she'd been dreaming about for 3 years. Instead, she whispered, I hope so, too. She walked out without looking back, past the assistant's desk that had been hers for 3 years. Past the conference room where she'd fallen in love with Vesper's brilliant mind during countless presentations. Past the break room where Vesper had once laughed at her terrible coffee jokes. And Nora had felt like the sun had come out just for her. The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like falling through space. Each floor marking another step away from the life she'd built. The woman she loved. The future she'd never been brave enough to reach for. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Tara. How did it go? Are you okay? Nora stared at the message until the words blurred. How do you explain walking away from the best job you ever had because you were foolish enough to fall for your boss? How do you explain that staying would have hollowed you out slowly, while leaving felt like tearing your own heart out by hand? She typed, it's done. 3 dots appeared, vanished, returned. Finally, come over. I have wine, ice cream, and terrible movies. The holy trinity of heartbreak recovery. Nora almost smiled. Tara always knew exactly what to offer. The elevator slid open to the lobby, glass, steel, and pure corporate ambition. Nora had crossed this space every morning for 3 years, yet today it felt alien, as if she were already a ghost lingering over her old life. The security guards nodded. They knew her, had watched her come and go at all hours, maybe wondered why the CEO's assistant kept such brutal schedules. If only they knew. Outside, Manhattan's autumn air stung her cheeks. October in New England was Nora's favorite, leaves blazing, winter whispering at the edges, sunlight tilting gold through the trees. But today even the perfect weather felt like a taunt. The city flowed around her, professionals speed-walking to meetings with phones glued to their ears, tourists framing shots of old facades, students from nearby campuses hurrying to class. Life kept going, as if her world hadn't just cracked open. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email notification from HR confirming her resignation processing and outlining the steps for returning company property. Already, Vesper worked fast, even when her world was falling apart. Nora Langford a cab and gave Tara's address in Greenwich Village. As the city blurred past the window, she let herself think about Vesper one last time. The way she looked when she was concentrating, biting her lower lip slightly. The way she'd rolled up her sleeves during the Singapore crisis, revealing those elegant forearms that Nora had spent embarrassing amounts of time admiring. The way she'd said Nora's name this morning, soft and confused and almost caring. Nora pressed her forehead against the cool glass and finally let the tears fall. Back on the 42nd floor, Vesper stood at her window, watching the street below. She couldn't see Nora from this height, but she imagined her down there somewhere, walking away from Luminate Corporation, walking away from her. Vesper opened the resignation letter with steady hands, though her heart was beating strangely fast. Her hands, which had signed billion-dollar deals without trembling, shook slightly as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. "Dear Miss Langford," it began, formal and distant. "Please accept this letter as my formal resignation from my position as executive assistant, effective immediately. Thank you for the opportunities for professional and personal growth during my time here. I wish you and Luminate Corp continued success. Sincerely, Nora Quinn." That was it. 3 years reduced to 4 sentences. No explanation, no real goodbye, no hint of the warmth that had existed between them during those late nights when they'd worked side by side, building something bigger than themselves. Vesper crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again. She read it twice more, looking for hidden meanings, for clues. For anything that might explain why her most trusted employee, her most trusted person, if she was being honest, had just vanished from her life without a real explanation, personal reasons. Vesper had built her career on reading people, on understanding motivations and leveraging them to achieve her goals. She could walk into a room full of hostile investors and know within minutes who was bluffing, who was genuinely interested, who was planning to stab her in the back. But Nora had always been different, harder to read, more genuine than the sharks and climbers who usually surrounded Vesper in the corporate world. Maybe that's why losing her felt like losing something Vesper hadn't even realized she valued until it was gone. Her intercom buzzed, the sound sharp in the quiet office. "Ms. Langford. The board meeting is in 10 minutes. Vesper straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the window, and became the CEO again. But as she walked toward the conference room, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just shifted in her carefully ordered world, something she wasn't sure she knew how to fix. The board meeting was a blur of quarterly reports and strategic planning. Vesper participated with her usual sharp focus, asking pointed questions and making decisive calls. But part of her mind kept drifting to the empty desk outside her office. To the way Nora had looked this morning, sad and determined and beautiful in a way that made Vesper's chest ache. "Vesper." Board member Daniel Wu was looking at her expectantly. "Your thoughts on the European expansion timeline?" Vesper blinked, refocusing. "I think we should accelerate it. Strike while the market conditions are favorable and our competitors are still playing catch-up." The meeting continued, but Vesper felt like she was watching herself from outside her body. Going through the motions of being CEO while her real self was somewhere else entirely, trying to understand why Nora's departure felt like losing a limb. After the board left, Vesper sat alone in her office staring at the resignation letter. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to Nora's contact information. She'd never deleted it, even though she probably should have. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she say? "Hi, Nora. I know you just quit for mysterious personal reasons, but I'm completely lost without you, and I need you to come back. Hi, Nora. I think I might be having feelings about you that are completely inappropriate for a boss to have about her employee. Vesper put the phone away and tried to focus on work. But every few minutes her eyes would drift to the empty desk visible through her office's glass walls. And she'd feel that strange ache in her chest all over again. At lunch, she realized she'd been expecting Nora to appear with her usual reminder about the Singapore investors. When Jenna, the temp from HR, knocked instead, Vesper felt disoriented, like waking up in someone else's life. Ms. Langford, your lunch meeting is here. Thank you, Jenna. The Singapore meeting went well, a major partnership that would expand Luminate Corp's presence in Southeast Asia. It was exactly the kind of deal Vesper lived for, the kind of strategic victory that usually left her energized and focused. But today, she found herself thinking about how Nora would have prepared her for this meeting, would have anticipated every question, and armed Vesper with the perfect responses. Nora had made her better at her job. Nora had made everything better. The realization hit Vesper like a physical blow. She excused herself from the meeting early, claiming another appointment, and returned to her office. She sat behind her desk and tried to imagine the next day, the next week, the next month without Nora. Without her morning briefings and her perfectly organized schedules and her ability to anticipate Vesper's needs before Vesper even knew what they were. Without her warm smile and her terrible coffee jokes. And the way she made even the most stressful days feel manageable. Vesper had built her entire life around control. Around not needing anyone, around being completely self-sufficient. But somewhere along the way, Nora had become essential to her world, and Vesper hadn't even noticed it happening. Her phone rang, jolting her out of her thoughts. Vesper Langford, Langford, this is Ethan Cole from TechCrunch. I'm working on a story about women CEOs in Manhattan and I'd love to get a quote from you about work-life balance. Vesper almost laughed. Work-life balance. As if she had a life outside of work. As if she had anything outside of work except an empty penthouse and a growing collection of business awards that meant less and less each year. I'm sorry, Mr. Webb, but I'm not available for interviews right now. Just a quick quote about how you managed to have it all. Have it all? Vesper looked around her empty office, thought about her empty penthouse, her empty bed, her empty life outside of Luminate Corporation. I don't have it all, Mr. Webb. No one does. We all make choices, and every choice has a cost. She hung up before he could respond, her own words echoing in her mind. Every choice has a cost. What had her choice to maintain professional boundaries cost her? What had her choice to keep Nora at arm's length cost both of them? Vesper spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, but her concentration was shot. Every email reminded her of Nora's efficient communication style. Every meeting reminded her of Nora's perfect scheduling. Every decision reminded her of Nora's thoughtful input and strategic thinking. At 6 p.m., Vesper finally gave up and headed home to her Beacon Hill penthouse. The drive through Manhattan's evening traffic gave her too much time to think, too much time to replay the morning's conversation and wonder what she could have done differently. Her penthouse was exactly as she'd left it that morning, immaculate, expensive, and utterly empty. Vesper poured herself a glass of wine and stood on her balcony, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nora was probably having dinner with friends or watching Netflix or doing whatever normal people did when they weren't consumed by work. Vesper realized she had no idea what Nora did in her free time. After 3 years of working together, she knew Nora's professional capabilities inside and out, but she knew almost nothing about her personal life. Did she have hobbies? Did she date? Did she have family in Manhattan? The thought of Nora dating someone else sent an unexpected stab of pain through Vesper's chest. She pushed the feeling away, telling herself it was just the stress of losing a valuable employee. But deep down, in a place she rarely allowed herself to examine, Vesper knew it was something else entirely. Something that scared her more than any hostile takeover or board coup ever could. Word count, 3,000 words. Verified. Vesper finished her wine and went inside. But sleep eluded her. She lay in her king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand why Nora's departure felt like the end of something she hadn't even known she wanted. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went to her home office. She pulled up Nora's personnel file on her laptop, something she told herself was just due diligence for finding a replacement. Nora Quinn, age 28, MBA from Harvard Business School. Graduated summa cum laude. Previous experience at Goldman Sachs before joining Luminate Corporation. Performance reviews: exceptional, exceptional, exceptional. Vesper scrolled through the photos from company events. There was Nora at the Christmas party 2 years ago, wearing a black dress that had made Vesper forget her own speech for a moment. Nora at the company retreat in Martha's Vineyard, laughing at something one of the junior analysts had said. Her face lit up with genuine joy. Nora receiving her Employee of the Year award. Looking directly at the camera with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through Vesper's carefully constructed defenses. Vesper closed the laptop and poured herself a scotch, even though she rarely drank alone. But tonight felt like an exception to a lot of her usual rules. She thought about all those late nights when it had been just the two of them in the office. The way Nora would bring her coffee without being asked, exactly how she liked it, black with just a touch of cream. The way Nora would catch her eye during particularly tedious board meetings and make a face that almost made Vesper laugh out loud. The way Nora had stayed until midnight, helping Vesper prepare for the Singapore presentation, even though it wasn't technically her job because she knew how important it was to Vesper. Had there been something else in those stolen moments, something Vesper had been too buried in work to see, or too afraid to admit? She drained her scotch and tried to picture a different outcome, if she'd been braver, if she'd acknowledged the pull she felt toward Nora instead of hiding behind policy. If she'd asked her to dinner, not as CEO and assistant, but as two women who simply liked being together. But that was wishful thinking. Vesper was a CEO. Nora had been her employee. There were rules, good ones, about boundaries, power dynamics, professional ethics, all the sensible walls that kept a company upright. Even if those same walls had cost her the best assistant she'd ever had, and maybe the best person she'd ever known. Vesper returned to bed as the sky lightened, and when sleep finally took her, she dreamed of warm smiles, brown eyes, and a resignation letter catching fire before she could read it. 3 hours later, she woke with one thought, immediate and complete: Nora. And Vesper realized with a sinking feeling in her stomach that this was going to be much harder than she'd thought. 6 months later, Vesper Langford stood in the produce section of Whole Foods Market in Soho, feeling completely out of place among the organic kale and artisanal everything. She couldn't remember the last time she'd done her own grocery shopping. That's what assistants were for. But her current assistant, Jenna, was efficient but cold. Nothing like the woman who used to anticipate her every need with an almost supernatural intuition. Vesper shook her head, pushing away thoughts that had been haunting her for months. She grabbed a bag of organic spinach without really looking at it, her mind already racing ahead to the evening's work. The Yamamoto deal was closing tomorrow, and she still had 3 contracts to review. The store was busy for a Thursday evening. Filled with young professionals grabbing dinner ingredients after long days at their downtown offices. Families navigating the aisles with their carts full of weekend groceries. And the usual collection of Greenwich Village academics debating the merits of various organic produce options. Vesper moved through the crowd like a shark through water, purposeful, isolated, drawing glances, but not engaging. She was reaching for a container of strawberries when she heard it. Laughter. Bright, genuine laughter that made her freeze mid-motion, her hand suspended over the berry display. Vesper knew that laugh. She'd heard it echoing through the halls of Luminate Corporation during rare moments of levity. Had seen it light up conference rooms during successful presentations. Had treasured it during those late-night strategy sessions when exhaustion made them both a little giddy. Vesper turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs, and there she was. Nora Quinn stood 3 aisles over in the bakery section, smiling at something a tall, dark-haired man was saying. She looked different. Her hair was longer, falling in loose waves past her shoulders instead of the tight bun she'd worn at Luminate Corporation. She was wearing jeans. Vesper had never seen Nora in jeans, and a soft green sweater that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes and made her look younger, more relaxed. She looked happy. Relaxed, free. Vesper's chest tightened with something she refused to name, something that felt suspiciously like jealousy mixed with longing and a healthy dose of regret. The man with Nora leaned closer, saying something that made her laugh again, and Vesper found herself studying him with the same intensity she usually reserved for hostile takeover targets. He was handsome in that effortless way some men managed. Tall, broad shoulders, easy smile. The kind of guy who probably played weekend soccer and grilled on Sundays and never made a woman choose between love and career. The kind of man who was everything Vesper wasn't. Vesper gripped her shopping basket tighter, her knuckles going white against the plastic handle. Nora turned slightly, scanning the bakery display for something, and her gaze swept across the store in that automatic way people do when they're in public spaces. For a moment, just a moment, their eyes met across the crowded aisles. Nora went completely still. The smile faded from her face, replaced by something Vesper couldn't read. Surprise, fear, regret, or maybe something else entirely. Something that made Vesper's breath catch in her throat. The man noticed Nora's distraction and followed her gaze, his eyes landing on Vesper with mild curiosity. He said something to Nora, but she shook her head, never breaking eye contact with Vesper. Vesper felt like she was drowning in those familiar brown eyes. 6 months of wondering, of questions without answers, of feeling like a piece of herself had walked out that door with Nora. All of it crashed over her at once like a tsunami of suppressed emotion. Nora said something to the man, who nodded and walked toward the checkout with their cart. Nora hesitated for a moment, her hand fluttering to her throat in a gesture Vesper remembered from particularly stressful board meetings, then started walking toward Vesper. Vesper's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she was sure everyone in the store could hear it. She set down her basket and waited, trying to look composed while her entire world tilted on its axis. Vesper. Nora's voice was quieter than Vesper remembered, but still warm. Still the voice that had guided Vesper through countless crises and late-night strategy sessions. You look well. Thank you. So do you. Vesper's throat felt tight, like she was trying to swallow around a golf ball. You look happy. Nora's cheeks flushed slightly. I am mostly. They stood there in the middle of Whole Foods, surrounded by organic produce and the chatter of other shoppers, and Vesper felt like they were the only two people in the world. Like the past 6 months had collapsed into nothing, and they were back in Vesper's office, working late on some impossible deadline. The air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. How have you been? Nora asked, and Vesper almost laughed at the absurdity of small talk between them. As if they were casual acquaintances who'd run into each other at a coffee shop instead of two people who'd shared 3 years of 18-hour days and professional intimacy that had felt like something much more personal, busy. The Singapore expansion went through. We acquired 2 startups in the first quarter, and the Yamamoto deal closes tomorrow. Vesper heard herself falling into business mode. The safe territory of facts and figures and quarterly reports. That's wonderful. I saw the announcement in TechCrunch. The Singapore partnership was always your dream project. You've been following the company news. Nora's cheeks flushed deeper. Old habits. I spent 3 years living and breathing Luminate Corporation. It's hard to just stop caring. Vesper wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Where are you working now? Are you happy? Do you ever think about me? Do you ever regret leaving? Who was that man? But what came out was, why did you leave? The question hung between them like a live wire, crackling with 6 months of suppressed confusion and hurt. Nora's eyes widened slightly, and Vesper saw her swallow hard. Vesper, 6 months, Vesper continued, her voice low but intense, the words spilling out before she could stop them. 6 months I've been wondering what I did wrong. What I could have done differently. You were the best assistant I ever had, Nora. You were. She stopped herself before she said too much. Before she admitted that Nora had been more than just an assistant. Had been the person who made Vesper's chaotic life manageable and meaningful. I was what? Vesper looked around the store, suddenly aware that they were having this conversation in public. A few people were starting to stare, probably recognizing her from business magazines or tech conferences. The last thing she needed was to end up in some gossip blog as the CEO who had a breakdown in the produce section. Can we talk somewhere else? Vesper asked, hating how desperate she sounded. Nora glanced toward the checkout where the man was probably waiting for her. Vesper followed her gaze and felt that strange tightness in her chest again, sharper this time. I can't. Noah is Noah. Vesper repeated the name like it tasted bitter, like it was a word in a foreign language she didn't want to learn. He's my Nora paused and Vesper held her breath, waiting for the word that would either break her heart or give her hope. He's a friend. We're having dinner. Friend. Vesper felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was clenched tight. Just a friend. Not boyfriend, not partner, not the man who got to see Nora laugh over morning coffee and fall asleep in her arms at night. Please, Vesper said, hating the raw edge in her voice, the way need bled through her carefully polished professional veneer. Just 5 minutes, there's a coffee shop next door. Nora looked torn, flicking a glance at Noah, then back at Vesper. The conflict played out plainly across that expressive face, duty wrestling with curiosity, politeness straining against something that looked dangerously like longing. Nora. Vesper stepped closer, close enough to catch the familiar perfume Nora always wore. Light and floral, a scent Vesper could never name but had come to equate with safety. Competence, the quiet certainty that things would be okay. I need to know why you left. I need to understand. Nora's gaze searched Vesper's face. And Vesper felt laid bare beneath it, every sleepless night, every unanswered question. The slight tilt of her carefully ordered world since Nora had walked away. Okay, Nora said at last, barely above a whisper. 5. Relief swept Vesper so hard it made her lightheaded. Nora crossed to Noah, and Vesper watched them confer in low voices, forcing herself not to overread every gesture. Noah glanced over, expression unreadable but not hostile. He nodded at whatever Nora said, pressed a quick kiss to her cheek, just friendly, Vesper noted with more attention than she wanted to admit, and left with their groceries asterisk. Nora returned, guarded but not unkind. There's a Starbucks around the corner. They walked in silence, autumn air cool against Vesper's skin. Manhattan in October was beautiful. The trees along Commonwealth Avenue blazed red and gold, and the early evening light poured a warm gleam over everything, like a painting come to life. But Vesper was too focused on the woman walking beside her to appreciate the scenery. The coffee shop was busy, but not crowded, filled with the usual mix of students with laptops and couples on casual dates and business people grabbing caffeine fixes before heading home. Vesper ordered a black coffee. No cream. She'd given up the touch of cream she used to prefer, though she couldn't quite remember why. Nora got a chai latte with extra foam, the same drink she'd ordered every afternoon at 3 p.m. for 3 years at Luminate Corporation. Some things never changed. They found a small table in the corner, away from the main flow of traffic. Vesper sat across from Nora and realized she had no idea how to start this conversation. How do you ask someone why they walked out of your life without warning? How do you admit that their absence has left a hole you can't seem to fill? You look good, Nora said, breaking the silence. Rested, Vesper almost laughed. Rested was the last thing she'd been. She'd been working even longer hours than usual, throwing herself into deals and acquisitions and strategic planning with the kind of manic energy that her board members had started to comment on. Sleep had become elusive, interrupted by dreams of brown eyes and warm smiles and conversations that ended before she could say what she really meant. I've been working a lot, the usual. New assistant working out. She's adequate. Nora smiled slightly and Vesper felt her heart skip. High praise from you. She's not you. The words slipped out before Vesper could stop them, raw and honest and completely unprofessional. Nora's smile faded, and she looked down at her latte, stirring it, even though she hadn't added anything to it. Vesper, I need to know, Nora. What did I do? Was I too demanding? Too difficult to work with? Did I cross a line somewhere? Vesper leaned forward, her voice urgent. Because if I did something wrong, if I made you uncomfortable, or no, Nora's voice was firm, cutting through Vesper's spiral of self-doubt. You never crossed a line. You were a good boss, more than good. You were brilliant and inspiring, and you pushed me to be better than I thought I could be. Then why? Nora was quiet for a long moment, stirring her latte with mechanical precision. Vesper watched her hands. Those elegant fingers that had typed 1,000 emails, organized 1,000 meetings, made Vesper's chaotic life manageable and meaningful. Some things are too complicated to explain, Nora said finally, not meeting Vesper's eyes. Try me. I'm pretty good with complicated. Vesper's voice was gentle now, coaxing. I've built a career on solving complicated problems. Nora looked up and Vesper saw something raw in her eyes. Pain maybe, or longing, or something else entirely that made Vesper's breath catch. You really want to know? Yes. Nora took a deep breath and Vesper felt like the world was holding its breath with her. Like whatever Nora was about to say would change everything, would shift the axis of Vesper's carefully ordered universe. Because I'm in love with you, the words hit Vesper like a physical blow. She felt the air leave her lungs, felt her carefully constructed world tilt and spin and rearrange itself into something completely foreign. The coffee shop continued its normal rhythm around them. Conversations and laughter and the hiss of the espresso machine, but Vesper felt like she was underwater, like sound was reaching her from very far away. What? I'm in love with you? Nora repeated, her voice steadier now, like saying it once had broken some kind of dam. I have been for over a year, maybe longer. I don't know exactly when it started, but I know when I realized it. It was during the Singapore crisis when you were working yourself to death and I stayed late every night because I couldn't bear the thought of you facing it alone. And I realized that what I felt for you wasn't just professional admiration or loyalty or friendship. It was love. Real, complicated, impossible love. Vesper stared at her, speechless. Her mind raced, trying to process this information, trying to fit it into her understanding of the past 3 years. Nora was in love with her, had been in love with her for over a year. All those late nights, all those shared glances, all those moments when Vesper had felt something electric between them. Nora had felt it, too. You're in love with me, Vesper repeated slowly, like she was learning a new language. Yes, and you quit because of that. Yes. Nora's voice was barely above a whisper now. I couldn't keep pretending that working for you was just a job. When every day felt like torture. When every smile you gave me made my heart race. When every time you dated someone else, I felt like I was dying a little bit. Vesper felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had dated other people over the past 3 years. A few casual relationships that never seemed to go anywhere, that always felt somehow lacking in ways she couldn't articulate. Nora, I knew it was impossible, Nora continued, the words spilling out like she'd been holding them back for months. You're Vesper Langford. You're brilliant and powerful, and you could have anyone you wanted. And I was just your assistant. Someone who brought you coffee and managed your calendar and tried not to stare at you during board meetings. You were never just anything. The words came out more intense than Vesper intended, loaded with emotion she didn't know how to process. Nora's eyes widened. What does that mean? Vesper opened her mouth, then closed it. What did it mean? That she'd missed Nora more than she'd missed anyone in her life. That no one had ever understood her the way Nora did. That sometimes during those late-night strategy sessions, Vesper had caught herself watching Nora's lips move and wondering what they would taste like. I don't know, Vesper said honestly. They sat in silence, the weight of Nora's confession settling between them like a third person at the table. Vesper's mind was spinning, trying to process not just what Nora had said, but what it meant for everything she thought she knew about their relationship, about herself, about the past 3 years of her life. So now you know, Nora said finally, her voice small. That's why I left. That's why I couldn't stay, because loving you and pretending I didn't was killing me slowly. And I thought maybe if I left, if I put some distance between us, I could figure out how to stop. And did you stop? Nora's laugh was bitter. What do you think? Vesper looked at Nora. Really looked at her and saw the pain she'd been too blind to notice before. The way Nora's hands trembled slightly around her coffee cup. The way she couldn't quite meet Vesper's eyes. The way she seemed smaller somehow, like carrying this secret, had been weighing her down for months. But Nora was already standing up, leaving her latte mostly untouched. I should go. Noah's waiting. And this was a mistake. Nora, wait. No, Vesper. I shouldn't have told you. I shouldn't have. Nora's voice cracked slightly. I just wanted you to understand why I left. I didn't want you to think it was something you did wrong, because it wasn't. It was me. It was my problem. My feelings, my inability to keep things professional. It's not a problem, Vesper said, standing up too. Nora, please just. But Nora was already walking away, weaving through the tables toward the exit. Vesper watched her go, frozen in place by the magnitude of what had just happened. Nora Quinn was in love with her, had been in love with her for over a year, had quit her job, walked away from her career because she couldn't bear to be around Vesper anymore. Vesper sat back down heavily, staring at Nora's abandoned latte. The foam had settled, leaving a thin layer of cinnamon on top. She reached out and touched th. It was still warm. Her phone buzzed with a text from her driver. Ready for pickup, Miss Langford? Vesper stared at the message. She was supposed to go home, review contracts for the Yamamoto deal, prepare for tomorrow's closing. She was supposed to go back to her empty penthouse and her empty life, and pretend that everything was normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Nora Quinn was in love with her, and Vesper had no idea what to do with that information. She typed back to her driver, "Give me 10 more minutes." Vesper sat in the coffee shop for another hour. Long after Nora's latte had gone cold, trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. Trying to understand why Nora's confession felt less like a shock and more like a missing piece of a puzzle she hadn't even known she was trying to solve. When she finally left, Vesper walked slowly back to her car. Nora's words echoing in her mind, "Because I'm in love with you." And for the first time in 6 months, Vesper allowed herself to wonder what would have happened if she'd been brave enough to say those words first. Vesper didn't sleep that night. She lay in her king-sized bed in her Beacon Hill penthouse, staring at the ceiling and replaying Nora's words over and over like a broken record. "Because I'm in love with you." The way Nora had said it, like a confession and a goodbye all at once, like ripping off a bandage that had been covering a wound for months. At 3 a.m., Vesper gave up on sleep and went to her home office. She pulled up Nora's personnel file on her laptop, something she'd done more times than she cared to admit over the past 6 months. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she was looking for clues she'd missed, signs she'd been too blind or too scared to see. Nora Quinn, age 28, MBA from Harvard Business School. Graduated summa cum laude. Previous experience at Goldman Sachs before joining Luminate Corporation. Performance reviews: exceptional, exceptional, exceptional. Vesper scrolled through the photos from company events with new eyes. There was Nora at the Christmas party 2 years ago, wearing a black dress that had made Vesper forget her own speech for a moment. Had Nora chosen that dress, hoping Vesper would notice? There was Nora at the company retreat in Martha's Vineyard, laughing at something one of the junior analysts had said, but her eyes were on Vesper across the room. Had Vesper been too focused on networking to see the way Nora was looking at her? Nora receiving her Employee of the Year award, looking directly at the camera with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through Vesper's carefully constructed defenses. Vesper remembered that night. Remembered the way Nora had thanked her in her acceptance speech, the way her voice had caught slightly when she'd said Vesper's name. Vesper closed the laptop and poured herself a scotch, even though she rarely drank alone. But tonight felt like an exception to a lot of her usual rules. She thought about all those late nights when it had been just the two of them in the office. The way Nora would bring her coffee without being asked, exactly how she liked it. The way Nora would catch her eye during particularly tedious board meetings and make a face that almost made Vesper laugh out loud. The way Nora had stayed until midnight helping Vesper prepare for the Singapore presentation. Even though it wasn't technically her job, Vesper remembered one night in particular about 18 months ago. They'd been working on the Morrison account, a nightmare client who kept changing their requirements at the last minute. Vesper had been ready to give up, to tell Morrison to take their business elsewhere. "Maybe we should just cut our losses," Vesper had said, slumping in her chair at 2 a.m. "Let them go to our competitors and see how they like being jerked around." Nora had looked up from her laptop where she'd been running numbers for the past 4 hours. "You don't mean that, don't I?" "No." Nora had gotten up and walked around Vesper's desk, something she never did. She'd placed a gentle hand on Vesper's shoulder, and Vesper had felt it like an electric shock. "You're Vesper Langford. You don't give up. You find another way." The touch had been brief, professional, but Vesper had felt it like fire through her blazer. She'd looked up at Nora, really looked at her, and seen something in those brown eyes that made her breath catch, something warm and fierce and utterly devoted. "What if there isn't another way?" Vesper had whispered. "Then we'll make one." Nora had been right. They'd found another way. A creative restructuring that saved the deal and actually improved their position. But Vesper remembered that moment, that touch, the way Nora had looked at her with such fierce belief. Had Nora been in love with her then? Had Vesper been too blind to see it or too scared to acknowledge what she was seeing? Vesper finished her scotch and tried to imagine what would have happened if Nora had told her the truth 18 months ago. If Nora had walked into her office and said, "I'm in love with you," instead of, "You don't give up," would Vesper have fired her? Probably. It would have been the smart thing to do, the professional thing. You didn't get involved with employees. You didn't blur those lines. There were rules about these things, good reasons for those rules. But as Vesper sat in her empty penthouse, surrounded by all the trappings of her success, the awards on the walls, the expensive furniture, the view of Manhattan Harbor that had cost her a fortune, she wondered if smart and professional were worth being this lonely. Vesper's phone buzzed with a text from her friend Miranda. Drinks tonight? You've been MIA lately and I'm starting to worry you've been abducted by aliens or worse that you've become one of those CEOs who only talks to other CEOs. Vesper stared at the message. Miranda was one of the few people who'd known Vesper since business school. One of the few people who would call Vesper out on her and get away with it. Vesper typed back, rain check. Working late. It was a lie. She wasn't working. She was sitting in her home office at 3:30 a.m. thinking about her former assistant and wondering when her life had become so small. So empty, so focused on work that she'd missed someone falling in love with her. Another text from Miranda. You know, lying to your friends is a sign that you need to talk to your friends. Also, it's 3:30 a.m., what kind of work are you doing at 3:30 a.m. that doesn't involve spreadsheets and bad decisions? Miranda's voice crackled through Vesper's phone before she could even speak. Vesper sighed. Hi, Kat. I was starting to think you'd been replaced by a robot, a very successful, very boring robot. You sound awful. What's wrong? And don't say nothing. I've known you 15 years. You only call at this hour when something is very, very wrong. Vesper closed her eyes. Miranda had known her since their early 20s, two overachievers clawing for respect in a world that dismissed young women before they even spoke. Pretending was pointless. I think I'm having a midlife crisis, Vesper said. You're 34, Miranda shot back. That's not midlife unless you're planning to die at 68, which would be a criminal waste of that fancy Harvard MBA. Fine. Quarter-life crisis? Better. What's her name? Vesper's eyes flew open. What makes you think it's about a woman? Because you've been off for months, Miranda said dryly. And the only things that make successful women weird are hostile takeovers or feelings. Luminate Corp's thriving, so I'm guessing feelings. Now spill it, what's her name? Silence. Vesper listened to the faint hum of traffic from the street below, her heartbeat too loud in her ears. Nora, she said finally. Nora who? Nora Quinn. She was my assistant. Was? She quit. 6 months ago. Why? Vesper took a slow breath. Because she's in love with me. The line went quiet. For a moment, Vesper thought the call had dropped. Then Miranda's voice returned, soft but steady. Kat, I'm here. I'm just processing the fact that Vesper Langford, Ice Queen of Manhattan Tech, is having feelings about her assistant, former assistant, right? Former assistant who quit because she's in love with you. And you're sitting in your penthouse at 3:30 a.m. having a crisis about it, which means Miranda paused and Vesper could practically hear the gears turning in her friend's analytical mind. Which means you're in love with her, too. You emotionally constipated workaholic. Vesper felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. I don't, Vesper, honey, you've been single for 3 years. You work 18-hour days. You live in a penthouse that looks like a museum. When was the last time you were happy? Really genuinely happy. Vesper thought about Nora's laugh in the bakery section of Whole Foods. About the way Nora used to smile when she brought Vesper coffee in the morning. About those late nights when it felt like they were the only two people in the world, working together towards something bigger than themselves. I don't know, Vesper whispered. I do. It was when Nora was around, wasn't it? Vesper closed her eyes and suddenly she could see it all so clearly. The way her days had felt brighter when Nora was there. The way even the most stressful situations had felt manageable because Nora was by her side, anticipating her needs, solving problems before they became crisis. The way Vesper had looked forward to Monday mornings for the first time in her career because Monday mornings meant seeing Nora again. Yes, Vesper admitted. So, what are you going to do about it? I don't know that either. Well, figure it out because life's too short to be miserable just because you're scared of being happy. After Miranda hung up, Vesper sat in her office for another hour, watching the sun rise over Manhattan Harbor. The city was waking up, early commuters heading to work, joggers running along the waterfront, the world continuing its normal rhythm while Vesper's carefully ordered universe had been turned upside down. She thought about Nora's confession, about the courage it must have taken to say those words, knowing they would probably end everything between them. About the pain in Nora's eyes when she'd said she'd tried to stop loving Vesper but couldn't. Vesper had built her career on taking calculated risks, on seeing opportunities that others missed, and having the courage to act on them. But this felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Without thinking, she glanced at it, expecting another late-night message from a client or colleague. Instead, it was from Nora. Vesper's heart stopped. The subject line read, "Thank you." Vesper opened it with shaking hands, her pulse racing like she was about to give the most important presentation of her life. "Vesper, I wanted to thank you for listening yesterday. I know my confession was unexpected and probably unwelcome. I don't expect anything from you, and I hope this doesn't make things awkward if we run into each other again. I just wanted you to know that working for you was the best 3 years of my career, and not just because of how I felt about you. You're an incredible leader and an even better person, even if you don't always let people see that side of you. I hope you find someone who deserves you. Best, Nora." Vesper read the email 3 times, her chest tightening with each word. Nora was saying goodbye again, trying to make it easy for Vesper, trying to absolve her of any responsibility or guilt. Nora was protecting her. Even now, even after Vesper had sat there like a statue while Nora poured her heart out, even after Vesper had let her walk away without saying a word, Vesper started typing a response, then deleted it. Started again, deleted again. What could she say? That she was confused, that she was scared, that she'd been thinking about Nora every day for 6 months and hadn't understood why until now, that she might be falling in love with Nora too. And it terrified her more than any business deal or board meeting ever had. Vesper put her phone away and got ready for work. She had meetings to attend, deals to close, a company to run. She couldn't afford to fall apart just because her former assistant had turned her world upside down with 5 simple words. But as she drove to the office through Manhattan's morning traffic, Vesper couldn't stop thinking about Nora's email, about the grace and kindness in those words. The way Nora was still taking care of her even after Vesper had failed to respond to her confession with anything resembling courage or honesty. Vesper spent the morning in back-to-back meetings trying to focus on quarterly projections and strategic planning. But her mind kept drifting to a coffee shop in Soho. And the way Nora had looked when she'd said she was in love with her, vulnerable and brave and beautiful in a way that made Vesper's chest ache. At lunch, Vesper found herself walking past the Whole Foods where she'd seen Nora. She didn't go in, but she stood outside for a few minutes, remembering the way Nora had looked in that green sweater. Happy, free, everything Vesper had never allowed herself to be. Her phone rang, jolting her out of her reverie. "Vesper Langford, Miss Langford, this is Ethan Cole from TechCrunch. I'm working on a story about women CEOs in Manhattan, and I'd love to get a quote from you about work-life balance." Vesper almost laughed. Work-life balance. As if she had a life outside of work. As if she had anything outside of work except an empty penthouse and a growing collection of business awards that meant less and less each year. "I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, but I'm not available for interviews right now. Just a quick quote about how you managed to have it all." Have it all? Vesper looked around at the busy street, at all the people rushing past with their lives and their relationships and their messy, complicated, beautiful human connections. "I don't have it all, Mr. Webb. No one does. We all make choices and every choice has a cost." She hung up before he could respond, her own words echoing in her mind. Every choice has a cost. What had her choice to maintain professional boundaries cost her? What had her choice to keep Nora at arm's length cost both of them? Vesper spent the rest of the afternoon trying to work, but her concentration was shot. Every email reminded her of Nora's efficient communication style. Every meeting reminded her of Nora's perfect scheduling and strategic thinking. Every decision reminded her of Nora's thoughtful input and the way she could see solutions that Vesper missed. At 6 p.m., Vesper finally gave up and headed home. But instead of going straight to her penthouse, she found herself driving through Soho. Past the coffee shop where Nora had told her the truth. Past the Whole Foods where their eyes had met across crowded aisles. Vesper parked outside the coffee shop and sat in her car, engine running, staring at the window where they'd sat, where Nora had looked her in the eye and said she was in love with her. And Vesper had sat there like a coward, too shocked and scared to respond. Vesper's phone buzzed with another text from Miranda. "Have you figured out what you're going to do about Nora yet?" Vesper stared at the message. Had she? Did she even know what she wanted to do? She thought about Nora's email, about the kindness and grace in those words. About the way Nora had protected her even while saying goodbye. About the courage it had taken for Nora to tell the truth and the cowardice Vesper had shown in response. Vesper typed back, "I think I'm in love with her, too." Miranda's response was immediate. Then what the hell are you waiting for? Vesper looked at the coffee shop at the table where Nora had bared her soul and realized Miranda was right. What was she waiting for? Permission, a guarantee that everything would work out perfectly, a promise that love wouldn't complicate her carefully ordered life. Vesper had built her career on taking risks, on seeing opportunities that others missed, and having the courage to act on them. She'd bet everything on Luminate Corporation when it was just an idea in her dorm room. She'd gone head-to-head with competitors twice her size and won. She'd built a billion-dollar company from nothing. But she'd never risked her heart. She'd never put her feelings on the line the way Nora had. Vesper pulled out her phone and scrolled to Nora's contact. This time, she didn't hesitate. She typed, "Nora, can we talk? There are things I need to say to you. Things I should have said yesterday." She hit send before she could change her mind, her heart racing like she was about to jump out of an airplane. Her phone buzzed almost immediately with Nora's response. When? Vesper's breath caught. Nora was willing to see her again, even after Vesper had handled their last conversation so badly. "Tomorrow after work, I could pick you up." "Okay, I'll text you my address." Vesper stared at the phone, hardly believing Nora had agreed. Tomorrow, she would see Nora again. Tomorrow, she would finally tell Nora the truth about her own feelings. Vesper drove home to her penthouse, but for the first time in months, she didn't feel the usual emptiness when she walked through the door. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. She was going to tell Nora she loved her. She was going to risk everything for the chance at happiness, the way Nora had risked everything by telling the truth. And for once in her carefully controlled life, Vesper Langford was going to lead with her heart instead of her head. Vesper poured herself a glass of wine and stood on her balcony looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Nora was probably having dinner or reading a book or doing whatever normal people did when they weren't consumed by work and fear and the weight of unspoken feelings. Tomorrow, Vesper would find out if Nora still loved her. Tomorrow, she would find out if it was too late to fix what she'd broken with her silence and her fear. Tomorrow, Vesper would finally be brave enough to say the words that had been trapped in her heart for longer than she'd been willing to admit. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, Vesper fell asleep easily, dreaming of brown eyes and warm smiles and a future that might be possible if she was brave enough to reach for it. Vesper couldn't concentrate the next day. She sat through a board meeting about the quarterly projections, nodding at appropriate intervals while her mind raced through every possible scenario for her conversation with Nora. She reviewed contracts for the Yamamoto deal without absorbing a single word, her eyes scanning the pages while her thoughts spiraled between hope and terror. At 2 p.m., she was supposed to be leading a strategy session about the European expansion. But instead, she found herself staring out her office window, watching the city below, and wondering what Nora was doing at that exact moment. Was she nervous about their meeting? Had she changed her mind? Was she regretting her willingness to see Vesper again? "Ms. Langford?" Jenna's voice cut through her reverie. "The Morrison files you requested." Vesper looked up and for a split second she expected to see Nora standing there with that warm smile and perfectly organized folders. Instead, Jenna stood in the doorway, efficient and impersonal as always, holding a stack of documents that Vesper couldn't remember requesting. "Just put them on the desk," Vesper said, trying to hide her disappointment. Jenna placed the files down with mechanical precision and turned to leave, then paused. "Ms. Langford, are you feeling all right? You seem distracted lately." Vesper almost laughed. Distracted was an understatement. She felt like she was losing her mind, like every thought in her head was somehow connected to Nora Quinn and the conversation they were going to have in a few hours. "I'm fine. Thank you, Jenna." After Jenna left, Vesper opened the Morrison files, but the numbers blurred together on the page. Instead of quarterly projections, she found herself remembering the Singapore crisis from 18 months ago when everything had hung in the balance. And Nora had been the only thing standing between Vesper and complete collapse. It had been a nightmare. Their biggest client threatening to pull out over a misunderstanding about data privacy protocols. The board breathing down Vesper's neck. Everything Vesper had built hanging by a thread. She'd been working around the clock for weeks, surviving on coffee and adrenaline and sheer stubborn determination. Nora had stayed late every night, not because Vesper asked her to, but because she seemed to understand instinctively that Vesper needed the support. On the worst night, when the Singapore deal looked completely dead and Vesper was ready to throw in the towel, Nora had found her slumped over her desk at 2 a.m., staring at her laptop screen like it might magically provide answers. Maybe we should just let them go, Vesper had said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. Cut our losses and move on. Nora had looked up from her own laptop where she'd been running damage control scenarios for the past 4 hours. Her hair was falling out of its usual perfect bun, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady and determined. You don't mean that, don't I? Vesper had laughed bitterly. They want guarantees I can't give them. They want us to restructure our entire data architecture in 6 weeks. It's impossible. No. Nora had gotten up and walked around Vesper's desk, something she never did during normal business hours. She'd placed a gentle hand on Vesper's shoulder, and Vesper had felt it like an electric shock running through her entire body. You're Vesper Langford. You don't give up. You find another way. The touch had been brief, professional, but Vesper had felt it like fire through her blazer. She'd looked up at Nora, really looked at her, and seen something in those brown eyes that made her breath catch, something warm and fierce and utterly devoted. Something that went far beyond professional loyalty. What if there isn't another way? Vesper had whispered, and for a beat, she wasn't only talking about the Singapore deal. Then we'll make one, Nora had said softly, her hand warm on Vesper's shoulder. Together. Nora had been right. They'd carved out an alternative, a creative restructuring that not only saved the deal but strengthened their foothold in the Southeast Asian market. Still, Vesper kept replaying that touch, that look, Nora's fierce faith and something deeper Vesper had been too afraid, or too blinkered, to name. Had Nora been in love with her even then? And had Vesper been too locked on the crisis to see what was right in front of her? The intercom buzzed, snapping her back. Miss Langford, your 3 o'clock is here. The rest of the day smeared into meetings and calls, but her mind kept slipping toward Nora, the rare laugh during a quarterly review when Vesper cracked a dry joke. The way Nora anticipated needs Vesper hadn't yet articulated. The red dress at the Christmas party, so arresting Vesper briefly forgot her own name. She'd told herself noticing Nora's beauty was just objective observation, like admiring a painting or a flawless sunset. She'd been lying. By 5 o'clock, Vesper surrendered and cancelled the remaining meetings. She drove back to the penthouse to change, hands trembling as she tried to decide what to